Hello and welcome back to Highway to Hoover, a production of SEC Extra over at d1baseball.com. I'm your host, Joe Healy, joined as always by my co-host and good friend, Mark Etheridge. And before we get into a fall roundup episode of Highway to Hoover, as I would call it, we've got a bunch of little stuff to touch on here, a potpourri, if you will, of items here. I have to let you know that this Highway to Hoover podcast and every Highway to Hoover podcast as we get into the 2024 season is brought to you by Pitch Logic, the system used by players, coaches, scouts, and instructors at all level of play, from youth leagues to the big leagues. The easy-to-use and affordable technology makes the platform accessible to every player at every level. All the metrics and features used at the highest level. See pitchlogic.com for more information. Mark, as always, we're going to start off with our football segment. I don't know if people love or hate that about us, but we're just going to keep doing it stubbornly, regardless. Specifically, so I didn't get to see a lot of the Oregon-Washington game. I saw I was at Clemson Coastal, the fall exhibition, on Saturday, kind of right around the same time. I did pull it up on my phone with 3 or 4 minutes left in the fourth quarter, so I got to see the key moment where, Oregon went for it late in the fourth quarter, and then Penix drives them down the field, and then the missed field goal, yada, yada. I think most people listening to this that follow college football have seen that by now. And there's a lot of criticism about Dan Lanning and his going for it. And I think, so it happened twice, into the first half and then into the game.
Happened more than that. I mean, he was 0 for 4 on fourth down.
Right. He's super aggressive. So I think we can quibble about maybe the one leading up to half, because they sure could have used 3 points then. But I don't hate the fourth quarter call from a couple of standpoints. One is just the simplicity of, like, look, do we really want to give the ball back to Michael Penix? If we can keep the ball out of their hands, I think you need to do that. And it's not like it was 4th and 12, right? I mean, so I understand that. I also have heard a theory, and I've heard it in a few different places, but I'll give credit to Bud Elliott from 247 Sports about this idea that this is kind of a new thought in clock management in college football, that this is the football equivalent of a 2-for-1 in basketball. So I don't remember exactly how much time was left when they went for it, but it's like a pushing 2 minutes, and in today's college football, especially against good offenses, as we know, 2 minutes is like a lifetime, right? Especially if they have timeouts.
And so,
right, exactly. So Oregon's looking at it and saying, okay, if we get this first down, the game is effectively over at that point. Because now we're getting into scoring range already, and we can
Washington
melt off.
Had no timeouts.
Okay, yeah, I forgot about the timeout situation. So yeah, they could basically melt the clock down at that point. And also, barring that, if we don't get it, okay, we turn the ball over, not great. May we stop them, but even if we don't, we have Bo Nix, a good offense of our own, and Washington is probably going to score quickly enough that there's a decent chance we get the ball back with 45 seconds left or something. Now, again, that's a lot of ifs, ands, or buts there, but I do understand the logic a little bit of, if we're going to give the ball up, let's give it up now when we still have a puncher's chance of getting the ball back. And so again, I think reasonable people can disagree with that, but I can at least see the logic.
Yeah. This is a challenge for me. I mean, it's the whole Maddenization of football strategy. I mean, back in my day, I mean, it was, you tried to hold the ball and run the clock out by getting first downs. And if you didn't, you punted and you played defense. Okay. And that was the way it was. I can remember all these times where, in today's world, if you break loose and you score and you have a chance to score in the final few minutes, you don't score. You take a knee at the 1 yard line to kill more time, right? And that was never a thing, back when I played back in the old days. So that part has been an adjustment, because I can remember having the conversation with my dad. The announcer would say, "Yeah, you don't want to score too quick," and he like, "The hell you don't. You want to get those points when you can get them, because you're not guaranteed to get them." Right. And so that's, you get those impressions, as you age. And that's always been my thought. And that's sort of evolved as the sport has evolved. So here's the thing about this specific thing with Lanning, the 2-for-1 concept is, you aren't trusting your defense at all. If you're just going to give up the ball at midfield in hopes of they score quickly so I can get the ball back. I mean, there's no shot clock. Okay. It's not like basketball where you're guaranteed another possession if you do the 2-for-1 thing. My defense is so bad that I've got to leave enough time on the clock after they score so quickly. That to me is that's a terrible message to send to your defense. Man, you guys suck so bad. We got to get our offense back out there. I just can't get along with that at all. Right? From a psychological standpoint to your defense, you want them to go out and win the game for you. You don't have to depend on your offense. So obviously different ways to approach it. And Dan Lanning is uber aggressive, and you look at the analytics, and the analytics say always go for it, whether it's 4th and 99 on your 1, always go for it. And I don't, that's a problem for me, because every team is different. Every situation is different. You have quarterbacks that get in grooves and they can do no wrong, and you also have it when they can do no right. And that's got to play into it. You can't just look at a chart to determine that stuff. So that to me is where I land on that. It's all situational based. You can't always go for it. You can't always punt, right? Like Jimbo Fisher seems to always punt. But I do think that there's a happy medium, but it's all dependent on the flow when you have a feel for it, right? You just can't say, well, we're aggressive. That's our strategy. We're always going, because you're not going to make those, right? If your team is not in the right flow.
Funny thing about that is the situation you mentioned, not trusting your defense, is that Oregon's defense is pretty good, like at least pretty talented.
Right? And they stopped them 3 straight times.
Yeah. So so I get that. And perhaps I'm frankly, bastardizing is maybe a strong word, but just like maybe I'm not quite I haven't heard this philosophy from Dan Lanning yet. So I don't, I'm not plugged into Oregon's post-game press conferences or anything, media availabilities, but so maybe I'm not quite on the nose of what they're looking to do there, but that's the general concept. So anyway, regardless, that was the best game of the weekend. I said, I was a little bit busy Saturday, so I didn't see every second of everything, but
that was one of the best games of the year. I mean, it was back and forth, and I was back and forth. I also watched some of Tennessee and A&M, which was the exact opposite from an aesthetic standpoint, right. But it was compelling. It was close.
Yeah, after the way Tennessee won games last year, the idea they're winning games this way is like, it's a real whiplash situation. Yeah. It turns out those receivers that could burn every defensive back in the country they had last year don't grow on trees. So that's kind of a big deal. But can you imagine if they did have those receivers with Joe Milton's arm? Like that's all they would do. Yeah. Like just run 4 verts all the time. That's true. I mean, accuracy is a thing.
He's got the arm strength, that's for sure.
The good news about that is you could just tell Joe Milton, if you overthrow him, you overthrow him. Never underthrow it, Also, we won't dive into this because we need to get to baseball stuff. But actually, as I said that, the game of the weekend might actually have been Stanford's comeback against Colorado late Friday night.
29-0 at halftime.
Ooh, my goodness. I'm not a big Coach Prime hater because I think he's interesting. He's fun. He's interesting. He's fun. I think we can quibble about the way he goes about some of the things, but I think ultimately his players like him. And I think he actually is like a good coach to them and all that stuff. But there are going to be there were a lot of people kind of savoring the way that game went down. I gave up on it. I went to bed.
Well, certainly it's humbling when you have such a huge lead and everybody's singing your praises. And then the next thing you know, you're losing. I mean, that's hard for anybody to deal with, especially someone like him who's just, he's been at the top for so long.
Especially against a Stanford team that really hasn't been able to move the ball since Andrew Luck was their quarterback. No disrespect to, I guess, Kevin Hogan. He was pretty good too. But, anyway, just a shocking turn of events there. That was one I think we all collectively as a college football watching populace woke up Saturday and said, what happened?
Yeah. Yeah. I didn't know either. I gave up on it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Certainly.
All right. Let's get into some baseball stuff here. Like I said at the top, this is a fall, a fall whip around kind of episode. We've got some fall nuggets, and we had Chris Burke on as a guest last week, and the week before that, Mark and Runes were on the show, and they talked about a big picture topic. So it's been a while since we've kind of dug in on specific stuff happening in the fall, and we've got some stuff to talk about. So let's do that now. I think one of the most interesting news items that we've had in the last couple of weeks, and we talked about this once before, but it actually turns out that Rintaro Sasaki, the player from Japan we talked about a few weeks ago, is coming to America. And I think at the time, I'll just speak for myself, but I think you were with me, Mark. At the time, I just kind of assumed, okay, this is a leverage play. Like he's ultimately going to play an NPB, and because that's where the money is. This is just kind of an interesting leverage move, but it turns out it wasn't. So he will be eligible to begin play for the 2025 season. That makes him draft eligible in 2027. I think I erroneously referred to him one time as being 18 already, but he's 17. So he would be draft eligible 2027, which is much sooner than he would have been theoretically posted by his NPB club. That would have been in the 2030s. Their system there is frankly kind of antiquated, but I understand it because it kind of keeps,
because they want to keep their players.
Right. It keeps the league strong because it is a strong league. And so their players aren't just basically all free agents every year to go to America. So I get it, but it is somewhat limiting in that the clubs in Japan have a lot of control over that. And so they have to wait a long time to be posted. So anyhow, so it gives him a lot quicker access to professional baseball here in America. And then, so my big picture thing here, and then I'll throw it to you, Mark, is I also saw, and shout out to Aria Gerson, Vanderbilt beat writer, who does a fantastic job. She's been on top of this. And she also mentioned that, or she retweeted a story that a pitcher out there named Daiichi Hirano is also doing this. And I do wonder if, I think we touched on this a little bit when we brought it up previously, but I do wonder if maybe this is the start of a trend in a world where the world is smaller, right? We talk about this in college sports, to use a comparison to something we talk about all the time, which is that, look, you rewind the clock 30 years, and kids who grew up in LA went to USC or UCLA, or maybe the Arizona schools, right? Kids who grew up in Florida went to FSU and went to Florida and maybe Georgia. But now you've got kids, the world is so small, relatively speaking, that you've got kids from all over the country going all kinds of places, right? So that the world of, yes, rosters are still mostly regional in most places, but options are just wide open to kids. And I wonder if this is kind of the same thing from an international standpoint, which is just like, hey, we have a better understanding now of different pathways to getting where we want to get, which is Major League Baseball. And if I'm in PB, maybe I don't know, I don't keep up with that league, but I wonder if they're a little worried just because, and does it lead to reform? And we don't need to jump into this because you and I are way over our skis talking about Japanese baseball reform.
Yeah.
But I do wonder if it leads to some changes to make players able to be posted earlier, or the standard to be posted earlier, because what happens if you have some of these players, and look, high school baseball in Japan is a big deal. So these players are high profile.
Yeah.
Do you start to have some talent get siphoned off? So some of these never end up in your professional league. Anyway, I'll throw it to you, Mark. What are your thoughts there?
So the initial thought for me is there'll be a lot of eyes on these early cases. And just like, when Sonny DiChiaro went to Auburn from Samford, and the thought was, okay, well, he was a nice player at Samford, but there's no way he's going to be able to handle SEC pitching, and then he was player of the year, right? So then everyone wants to be Sonny DiChiaro at that point. Every mid-major is trying to catch on an SEC team, and some were successful and some were not. So I do think that there's going to be a microscope on these early cases. And if it goes well, if it's a success story, then yeah, you're going to see a lot of it because everyone's a copycat, both from both sides, from the players and, from a college standpoint. But if it's not successful, then you while you should look at the nuance and understand the specific case why, I think there's going to be a lot of people that go, well, it didn't face good enough competition early. There wasn't a proper way to evaluate, the readiness, and I think, this could just be an anomaly, right? So I do think because of the high profile nature of this, that it's a big moment. Whether this young man, he's what, 6'1", 250? Is that what I saw? So he's almost like Sonny DiChiara, right? He's that type of player.
I've seen him referred to as the Japanese Prince Fielder.
Yeah, and that's a great comp. Yeah, so those kinds of things, there'll be a larger life. There'll be a big media scrutiny and how he handles this, not just from a baseball standpoint, but just all of the attention that a lot of guys won't get, because he's kind of he's the test case. And if this goes well, I think you're onto something. This could be a big deal. If he doesn't, then there'll probably be some others that'll try it, but it's not going to be the wave, that it could be.
And we should say, like, the only school he's really been linked to so far is Vanderbilt. That does not mean that is I'm certain. I don't have any inside information here, obviously, but it doesn't mean it's a sure thing. I'm certain other schools are going to at least make an attempt here, right? One of the other things that's interesting to me in the big picture here is this is going to be a different, for schools that want to try to play in this pool, it's going to be a different recruiting challenge, right? Because money, however you want to define that, whether it's scholarship percentage, NIL, the stuff that we know kind of drives a decent bit of the recruiting in college baseball, is really not going to apply, because these guys who were going to be legit draft picks, like, both of these guys are expected to be basically top 2 round draft picks for NPB. So they were going to make real money in professional baseball in Japan. So obviously money is not the deciding factor here. So if you're a program, you got to find something else to sell. And if you're Vanderbilt, obviously you can sell the history, the winning tradition. Look at all of our players in the big leagues in especially the last 10, 15 years. And then, oh, by the way, it's a Vanderbilt education, right? So that's going to be interesting. Like, what schools decide to play in this pool, because I think we're talking about the upper crust players who come from Japan, because it should be said, not a ton, but there are other Japanese players who end up in college baseball. For example, last year at Oregon, they had Riku Nishida. Now, he came out of the junior college ranks, though. And so that's the distinction I'm making is, the players who maybe are fringier players in Japan, who maybe understood the calculus of, I may or may not get drafted into NPB. So let me look at some other avenues that might be better for me. That's one thing. And we see that happen with international players from a few different places, but this is different, where it's like, hey, these guys would have made real money. But instead they want to come do this college thing. That's going to be a little bit different. That's new. And I'll be interested to see if this becomes more of a thing, like which schools end up being the places that get these guys.
Yeah. I mean, just looking at it from a personal perspective, I mean, you're talking about an 18, 19-year-old kid coming to a new country, speaking a different language, certainly not that they can't speak English, but they're certainly not speaking it conversationally every day. And that adjustment, in addition to, taking if you got a Vanderbilt, I mean, it's not like you're taking underwater basket weaving here. You're actually going to class and taking hard courses. And I mean, that's not an easy thing. And then you got baseball on top of that. Right. So it's going to take a special person, with discipline and structure, in order for that to be successful. So it's certainly interesting, and the types of elite athletes that make it typically have that kind of discipline. So it'll be a fascinating story for us to follow.
Yeah, I'm sure there'll be more on all this. I would suggest you, if you're not already following Aria with her work at the Tennessean, I would be surprised, but follow her, because she's done a really good job kind of staying on this from a Vanderbilt perspective. And as long as they seem to be kind of the most interested party, I assume there will be news coming out of there at some point. So make sure you're following her on Twitter, or X. I refuse to, it's still Twitter. It'll always be Twitter to me. Yeah. Okay, Mark, this is a segment where you're going to do some heavy lifting. You were in Tuscaloosa last weekend. We were both at fall games last weekend, but neither Clemson or Coastal are in the SEC. So those who are interested in those clubs will have to just read my fall reports coming out in the coming days, next week or so. But you were there for Alabama Auburn, little rivalry action in the fall in Tuscaloosa. I'm going to clear out the paint for you, Mark, and toss you the ball.
Yeah.
One quick thing. If you've not done so, Mark did a fantastic piece from that game with some on-field observations, but also some like big picture stuff. So I think it did a really good job of kind of encapsulating everything there. So if you've not read that yet, please do so over at SEC Extra at d1baseball.com. Go ahead, Mark. What do you got?
Well, we'll talk about both teams. But we'll start with Alabama. They have one position starter returning, the catcher, and all of these newcomers, all of these freshmen, all of these transfers, junior college transfers, D1 transfers, everything, and they're all sort of competing, right? So normally when you go into a fall, you might be looking for one or two starters, maybe three starters in your position group, and they're looking basically for everybody, right? So that's what makes it, they're a fascinating team because they definitely brought in some talent. I think they're going to hit. Gage Miller is a guy that to remember. Junior college transfer, I believe he was at Bishop last year, and originally a Pennsylvania kid. He's an infielder, and Rob Vaughn said one of the first people he brought up was this kid has barreled everything since he showed up. He's just one of these kids. You look at him and yeah, it's a nice player, and then he gets out there and you watch him hit, and it's like, whoa, okay, we got something here. So I mean, he's a breakout candidate. Now we'll see, how that continues. But that was somebody that's going to play somewhere. Whether he's third, whether they DH him or play him at first or whatever. So that part is interesting. And there's a freshman shortstop, Justin LeBron, and really toolsy, really athletic kid, competitive, and he has the look of one of these SEC shortstops. It's going to be a guy. Now whether he's ready as a freshman, remains to be seen. But he's going to get the opportunity. So those were two guys that stood out. And I think the other thing is Alabama had more pitching than I expected. Ben Hess did not throw, and they do expect him to throw in the next exhibition game against Florida State, and they're expecting him to be, good to go in the spring, which would be huge. He was their ace that missed the last half of the season. But Riley Quick is a guy I think could be, he could be a star. He's got he was 98, he had a 92, 93 mile an hour slider. I mean, it's all hard, man. And if he locates, he could be, one of the best pitchers in the conference. The other guy, Alton Davis II, they are considering stretching him out and seeing what he could do as a starter. They're going to, I think a lot of it will depend on what some other people do, and do they really need him? Is he one of their best three starting candidates? Because he's so good at the end of the game. And then the other piece I would mention is Pierce George, the Texas transfer as a sophomore. Really wasn't healthy at Texas last year. Didn't make the most of the few opportunities he got. And he came in, he was sitting at 100 miles an hour. It's not like he flashed it. I mean, it was constant. And he only threw an inning. He struck out 2 and got a weak fly ball on the third out. But it was, I mean, he looked like a guy. Now, whether he can sustain that, consistently, that'll be one of the keys to Alabama's season. Because if you got a guy like that at the end of the game, maybe Davis can play all kinds of different roles, right? And he can be a stopper. So I think that was from an Alabama perspective, and we can get into Auburn in a minute. I'll let you jump in. But I think for me, I was surprised at how many arms that they had who were effective and who had stuff, right? The legitimate top end SEC stuff.
Yeah, it's a good reminder because I think we look at what Alabama lost in the portal. Obviously Colby Shelton, Luke Holman, they'd love to have those guys. Who wouldn't? But I mean, it could have been a lot worse, right? I mean, they held on to some guys who were going to be Alton Davis and Riley Quick, to name just two, could have pretty much chosen their destination, right? But they didn't. They stuck around, so that's huge. And I was going to say quickly on Riley Quick, no pun intended. that he was a guy last year who, so Aaron saw Alabama last fall and was really excited about Riley Quick, and he had his moments last spring, but he was a guy who, when I would talk to other coaches about him, they were like, I thought his stuff would be better, and you wrote in that piece that, you got a quote from Rob Vaughn that, like, last year he was really focusing on like sinking it, and trying to get movement, and they lowered his arm slot, and and it feels like this year, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, but it feels like this year they're just kind of like, hey, why don't we just let him air it
Let it
out?
rip.
Yeah. Because it turns out 98's tough regardless.
Yeah.
So yes, that'll be interesting, because he was a guy that, like I said, I got some feedback on that was just like, he's definitely going to be a guy, but it's just, I expected his stuff to be a little better. And I think now we kind of understand why. So tell me a little bit about Auburn. Mark. It wasn't their best day on Friday, it seemed like, but
Well, I think that's
better days ahead,
attributable
probably.
to a couple of things. I mean, they had just started fall drills. They had played one. The most they had played was one 4-inning inter squad game. So to go out and play 14 innings this early was ambitious. Of course, they kind of delayed starting a little bit. Butch had knee surgery, and then they've got the construction going on, on campus with the facility where they're making some changes. They're going to have basically a Hall of Fame area, premium seating behind home plate. It's on target to be available for this year, and then they're going to kind of pause the construction and play a season. Maybe do a little bit on road trips and things like that, and then they're going to do really a whole bunch of other things all the way around the stadium. And then kind of one thing I'll highlight is they're going to have those like rail seatings at the top of the monster, right, where you have your drink there and you can stand and watch the game from up there, which what baseball fan wouldn't want to experience that. That seems like a really cool deal. So on the field, I do think that because they really couldn't stretch pitchers out, they had hitters that hadn't seen a lot of pitching yet. Certainly the quality that Alabama threw at them, I think that attributed to their showing. But certainly on the mound, they've got so much returning. I do think that they're going to have one of the deepest pitching staffs in the SEC. Right now, Butch says that's a problem because nobody's separating themselves. So he didn't know, his quote was, "I don't know who my dudes are." Right. And that's something, obviously, the more they work this fall and into spring, they're hoping to find their dudes. One dude that they, if he's healthy, he's a dude, is Joseph Gonzalez. And Butch was explaining how they plan to handle him. He was a guy through opening day last year, through 5 innings, and never pitched the rest of the year. And it was kind of this tease. I think he's going to be ready after this date and after this date, and he never got it back. So he had some minor surgery with Dr. Andrews, and they're ready. They think that he's going to be available for them this spring. So what they're going to do is he started throwing now, and he's going to continue to kind of slowly build all through the fall and the winter. And he's not going to take a break at the end. Most people go home for Christmas or whatever. He's going to stay and continue his ramp. And then they're hoping that, opening day, he's going to be one of the more ready people in the country because he's just continued his ascension. And it's a big year for him from a draft standpoint, it's his last year at Auburn, for Auburn's, team to have a guy like that to lead the staff. So that's a key. I think Herbert Holtz, who pitched last year, they're really looking for him to be one of the starters. And then Tanner Ballman, Butch mentioned, he's a guy he's expecting to take a jump this year, left-handed reliever. He could fill a lot of roles on that team. Could and so I think pitching wise, that's the strength. Offensively or position wise, Ike Irish at catcher was that's certainly noteworthy. He came in as a catcher, really played DH. I think he played a little first, but that was what he was last year in his great offensive freshman season. He's going to hit It's just a question of can he stick as the everyday catcher, or is he a partial, situational catcher, and continues to DH? He's going to play somewhere. So that's interesting. Cooper McMurray did not play. That was one of their bigger success stories last year. A guy kind of came out of nowhere, and Kansas transfer and had a great year. Of course, you got Pierce in the outfield and Stansfield. Those are really good building blocks, for their team offensively. And then they've got some transfers that they really like Cooper Weiss and Derek Fabian that could be guys, right, for them. So a lot of pieces there, but kind of like with Alabama, they've got to figure out who's going to fill what roles, but in the lineup and on the mound. You've got a lot of options, but how is this going to shake out? And of course, those teams are not the only ones with that situation or in early fall, but certainly that was the primary takeaways I took from last weekend.
Yeah, all good stuff. I from the pitching standpoint for Auburn, I would say a couple things. One is that in years when Auburn's pitching is a little more touch and go, they still manage, like last year, they still manage to like figure it out well enough. So if we come into a year where Butch is really excited about what they have on the mound, I think that signals they could be really good on that side. So that'll be interesting to watch play out as time goes on. And with Joseph Gonzalez, when I read the quote, as you described, how they were going to handle him, as I read that quote, I kind of thought maybe there was an element of, last year they kind of, I don't want to say played around with him, because that means that like they were
it's got a negative connotation.
But they were just like, they were trying to figure out how to best give him what he needed. Right. So they rested him in the fall, and then in the spring, they were kind of careful with him. And then he pitched on opening day or opening weekend. I don't know if it was actually opening day, but pitched opening weekend. And then they shut him down, and they kept like doing this thing where it was like, we're going to try it again in however many weeks, and we're going to evaluate him. And it just kind of felt like kicking the can down the road. So I wondered if the approach they're taking now is also kind of some element on like, we just need to like get you on the mound and see if it's going to happen. And if it doesn't, okay, but we need to find out, and look, they want to do right by the kid too. Like, I'm not suggesting they just need to, they're basically just telling him to like, hey, figure it out or don't. But I'm just saying, like, we need to know what we have, and you as a pitcher need to know what you're dealing with, so we can kind of both figure out how we need to approach it, whereas last year felt a lot more, day to day on like, let's just see how he feels today. Let's see how he feels tomorrow.
Well, Butch mentioned that he and Everett Tiford, their pitching coach, they went through, and included Joseph in this process of trying to understand, okay, what is the best plan? Okay, here are the different ways we could approach this. A lot of different ways to take it, right? And what's going to work best, to get him ready and set him up for success. And that's not just, arm care. That's the mental approach. That's the rest between outings or between pins, and all of these different factors that you have to consider, and what pitches you're throwing, how many you're throwing each time, and all of those different things, and how do you ramp to be at your best, and when should you be your best? You're shooting for opening day, of course, because that's when the games count, but you really don't have to be at your best opening day. You need to be there for the for the stretch run. And how do you get there? So I do think that because Butch is such a he's really into the mental side of the game, and I had a great conversation with him. I can't wait for this story to run. Just how they, not just this situation, but this is an example, but just in general, managing a team and managing a program and all the different nuances that go into it that are more than just between the baselines, and he's really good at that, and to get insight on that is going to, it's going to be a fascinating read for college baseball fans anywhere, and really for anyone who's coaching or leading, to have that insight from somebody who's been successful at it.
No doubt. I'm looking forward to it as well. Quickly, a couple of other items as we look to wrap here. Aaron Fitt, our colleague, was at Arkansas's Fall World Series earlier this week. He passed along a couple notes from what he saw there. I think it's worth jumping into a little bit. He mentioned that Arkansas's high-profile pitchers, Hagen Smith, Brady Tygart, and Mason Molina, have looked great. They've looked the part. They've shown everything you'd want to see there. But then freshmen like Gabe Gakel and Hunter Dietz, who I've heard a lot of positive things about this fall as well, have given the staff a look that maybe it's going to have impressive depth. And look, we've heard this before about Arkansas, and sometimes it doesn't play out that way, and injuries have been a part of that. But so I'm not saying I'm dubious of it. I understand where that thought is coming from. We'll just kind of have to see it play out. But Gakel in particular seems like a really interesting guy. I mean, the stuff, I watched some video on him earlier today because I hadn't really seen him. It's video from his high school days, and interesting delivery. Not the biggest guy, but the stuff is big time. And Aaron compared it to Brady Tygart in terms of it's super high spin curveball is his bread and butter. But the fastball velo is actually better than what Tygart typically is. So that'll be interesting to see there. On the offensive side, Aaron mentioned again that it's, they're doing a good job of plugging holes through the portal. And so, Bahiva Aloy from Sacramento State obviously is a big name there, and he's looked the part. But Aaron also really liked Jack Wagner, who is from Tarleton State, began his career at Kansas, went to Tarleton State and really broke out. He compared him to kind of a Chris Lanzilli, Jared Wagner type of player in terms of what he'll bring to the table. Yeah, exactly. And, I've heard different things on this. I've always given Arkansas a lot of credit. They do a really good job with transfers on the position player side. And I've talked to some coaches who have kind of looked at it in one way, and they've said, like, you're Arkansas. Where are your homegrown position player dudes, right? And I get that, I guess. But then I'll talk to other coaches and they're like, who cares? Like, they're still winning a bunch of games. They're still getting to Omaha pretty regularly. I mean, they're not having homegrown players, but they're recruiting transfers who are exactly what they need. Like, what's the problem here? So, but it kind of looks like they're still doing a really good job of that. And Aaron kind of put a fine point on it and said, it looks like another kind of, slam dunk, top 5, top 10 type Arkansas team, ho hum, because that's just kind of what their standard is now. So that'll be, I'm looking forward to obviously seeing them in the spring.
Yeah. I mean, they look like one of the favorites to win it all, honestly. Just if those new pitchers, I mean, if Molina is, what he's expected to be, coming over from Tech, and then you got Gakel, Dietz. I mean, you got some real options to supplement an already strong returning group, and that was the problem last year. They had good pitchers, they just didn't have enough, and doesn't look like that's going to be the issue this spring.
We shall certainly see on that. They're wrapping up here pretty soon. They went early on fall, so they're kind of the outlier almost. In Missouri goes fairly early too because of weather reasons, but most SEC clubs starting a little later. Arkansas went early, and so they are wrapping up here pretty soon. One final thing, I just wanted to give you, the listeners, kind of an idea of stuff we have coming up. So make sure you're following Mark and I on social media. I'm at Joe Healy D1. Mark is at Mark Etheridge, because we are doing some more fall coverage coming up. So obviously we'll have stuff for the website. We'll have some written content. We'll talk about it on the podcast, but a lot of times we're also firing off kind of quick thoughts on social media as we're there. So I'm leaving for a trip this weekend that'll take me to Tennessee. They're playing Virginia Tech. That'll be a lot of fun from an atmosphere standpoint because they play those games like they did last year against Memphis at neutral sites, and they draw a bunch of fans. And so that should be just a neat experience, if nothing else. I'll also see Missouri. I'm dropping in their fall World Series. I'll see Vanderbilt against Wake. Going to be some arms in the mound that day, I would have to imagine. And then I'm going to see Kentucky as they start to wrap up their fall against Morehead State a couple of weeks from now. In addition to, I'll also see a few teams outside of the SEC, but this is my most SEC heavy fall trip I have. I will see Georgia and Florida later in the fall. I'll see Georgia against Kennesaw State in November, and then I'll be there for Florida's Fall World Series the second weekend in November. But speaking of which, Mark, you will also be at the cocktail party between
Jacksonville.
Georgia and Florida and Jacksonville. So, again, if fans aren't following us on social media, do so, because we will have all kinds of stuff coming out about those various fall games, and we're excited to bring it to you.
Yeah. Fired up.
Absolutely. We're in the meat of fall ball now around the SEC. So that's exciting for sure. So that is going to do it for this edition of Highway to Hoover, a production of SEC Extra at d1baseball.com. Thank you to Pitch Logic for sponsoring this and every D1 Baseball Highway to Hoover podcast moving forward toward the 2024 season. Thank you, as always, to Mark, and thank you, the listener, for listening.